Good morning, guys, and happy Tuesday. Today, we are going to be learning about a wonderful composer from the classical period named Franz Joseph Haydn. So please go ahead and take out your packet for Haydn, and we will get started. Haydn had neither the flashy individuality of Mozart nor the brooding romantic passion of Beethoven. He was more of a middle management type. Haydn did spend a few years struggling to make ends meet as a young man in Vienna, but he spent most of his life, nearly 50 years, at the same job, which offered him creative scope and financial security. He was 24 years older than Mozart, yet outlived him by 18 years. That says more about Mozart than it does about Haydn, honestly. And until his very last years, he enjoyed, unlike Beethoven, good health. He spent his final years in well-deserved, peaceful retirement in comfortable surroundings with a private stock of his favorite wine, a Tokay. Haydn died in 1809 at 77 years of age with money in the bank and a wardrobe full of nice clothes. If his love life had gone better, he would have been even happier. Haydn was born into a simple peasant family in the little Austrian village of Rohrau near the border with Hungary in 1732. His father was a second-generation wheelwright, and his mother was a cook. They christened their son Franz Joseph, but around the house they called him Sepperl. That doesn't make any sense to me. As a boy, he was well-mannered and tidy. He liked to pretend he was playing the fiddle on 2 sticks of firewood. Well, it's a start. When he was 6, he went to live with a schoolmaster cousin in the nearby town of Hainburg. This man, Frank, was a stern teacher who thought his pupils could learn anything if only he beat them often enough. Haydn did learn from him that at least enough to be accepted as a choir boy at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. He was auditioned by the choir master, George Reuter, who bribed him with cherries and taught him how to sing a trill. Haydn said much later in life that he could never hear a trill without thinking of the taste of cherries. Little Haydn was a good singer, but a bit of a prankster. One prank finally lost him his place. He snipped the pigtail off the boy in front of him, and Reuter kicked him out of the choir. It was just as well. His voice was beginning to break, and there was talk of castrating him. Yikes. So there he was, 17 years old, with just 3 worn shirts, a ragged jacket, and no money to his name. For the next few years, Haydn lived a gypsy life as one of the many street musicians, or buskers, in the city of Vienna. He made a little extra money giving music lessons, just enough to pay the rent at his tiny garret on the Michaelerplatz. Late at night, he studied the keyboard works of C.P.E. Bach, that was one of Bach's sons, and composed his own music. His first big break came when he and some fellow buskers serenaded the house of Johann Joseph Kurz, a comedian and pantomime performer popularly known as Kurz Bernardin after his most famous role. Bernardin is a stock comic character, a simpleton, also known as Hanswurst. Kurz commissioned Haydn to compose music for a comic opera, Der Krumme Teufel, the Limping Devil. Haydn got paid 25 ducats, which made him feel very rich. After that, things started looking up for Haydn. The court poet Metastasio lived in a nicer apartment in the same building, and through him, Haydn met Niccolo Porpora, a famous singing teacher and composer. Haydn became his accompanist and valet. From Porpora, he learned not only fundamentals of composition, but also how to polish boots and keep the lint off a velvet jacket. A valet is like a personal assistant who just helps you with whatever you need help with. It was about this time that Haydn fell madly in love with one of his pupils, a lovely young woman named Therese Keller, a wig maker's daughter. Haydn wanted to marry her, but she decided she wanted to become a nun instead. When she entered the convent in 1756, Haydn composed a little organ concerto for the ceremony just to show there were no hard feelings. As a sort of consolation prize, Teresa's father suggested Haydn could marry her older sister, Anna Maria. She was 31, he was 28. Too upset to think straight, he said yes. He lived to regret it. Anna Maria was ugly, ill-tempered, and a bad housekeeper. Shortly into their marriage, she became a born-again Christian and spent all hours entertaining clergymen in their home. Worst of all, she had no appreciation of Haydn's life as a musician. She didn't care whether he was a cobbler or a composer. She would use his manuscripts to line cake tins or cut the paper into strips to curl her hair with. And you can see that really attractive picture there on your page. Haydn had a simple antidote to this suffering. He fooled around. Later he said he felt little guilt about this since his wife was unable to bear children. That's no excuse for cheating on your wife. That's bad. First he fell in love with a singer named Luigi Polzelli. They kept hoping her husband and his wife would die. Her husband did die, but Haydn's wife stuck around until 1800 when he was 68. Polzelli, meanwhile, had married someone else. Haydn's second love he met while visiting London, another singer named Rebecca Schroeder. There were probably others. Through his connection with Porpora, Haydn soon got a job as a composer to the court of Count Morzine, a Bohemian nobleman. From there, he was offered the job he stayed at for the rest of his life as court composer and Kapellmeister to Prince Paul Anton Esterházy, a Hungarian nobleman. Paul Anton didn't last long and was soon replaced by his brother Nikolaus the Magnificent. Nikolaus was a kind man and a decent musician, even if he did have a penchant for flashy clothing. Haydn's own uniform was blue with gold trim. Later, it was red with gold trim. Nikolaus liked to play an instrument called the baritone, which is kind of like a cello, a cross between a cello and a guitar. Nobody makes them anymore. But if you wanted to learn it, Haydn wrote about 160 chamber pieces for the, is it baritone? Bariton? I don't know. I've never seen one. Which ought to keep you busy for a while. Not content with a family palace at Eisenstadt, Nikolaus decided to build a splendid new summer castle, which he named Esterházy. He had it built in a swamp in the middle of nowhere because he was fond of duck hunting. Esterházy was a classy place, but Haydn and his musicians didn't like being stuck in the boondocks so far away from Vienna, not to mention their wives and families. The quarters were mostly single rooms. Haydn had one of the few apartments with room for his wife. Not that he spent any more time with her than he had to. This situation led Haydn to compose one of his best-known symphonies, number 45 in F-sharp minor, known as the Farewell Symphony. The joke comes at the end of the final movement when the instrumental parts drop away. Each player was instructed to snuff out his candle and leave the stage. By the end, there were only 2 violins playing, Haydn and Luigi Tommasini. Nikolaus got the message and everyone packed to leave the next day. Haydn's compositions have more nicknames than those of any other composer in the history of music. When you consider that he wrote, for example, at least 22 symphonies in D major, the nicknames become useful. Altogether, he wrote about 104 symphonies, a dozen masses, 52 piano sonatas, and about 84 string quartets. He had to have something to keep him out of the house at nights. Ugly wife. Even though his marriage was a disaster, Haydn had plenty else to be happy about. He was well respected by his contemporaries, including Mozart and Beethoven, who both studied with him. Members of his orchestra all called him Papa. He had stubby legs and a big nose and a mischievous sense of humor. When Haydn died in 1809, there was a simple funeral, since Austria was rather busy being invaded by Napoleon's troops. A couple of amateur medical students secretly stole Haydn's skull and put it in a little black box with a white silk cushion. They wanted to read the bumps on his head. In 1829, Prince Nikolaus Esterházy II had the body exhumed. That means, they dug him up. When he found that it had no head, boy was he mad. He finally tracked down the thieves and demanded it back. They had donated Haydn's skull to a Viennese musical society and gave him some other skull instead. It wasn't until 1954 that Haydn's head was buried along with the rest of his body. Other than that, though, he was a pretty together guy.